Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
Megillah Esther is an incredibly challenging text because on the one hand, it presents to us a very paradigmatic good girl, bad girl scenario. I don't want to say whore and Madonna, but let's say whore and Madonna, okay? We've got Vashti on the one hand that everybody has come to vilify. She's clearly the bad girl, and Esther on the other hand, clearly the good girl. Not so clear. So how do we get there? It's very important that we study the Midrash, because the Midrash Rabbah on Esther opens up for us some extraordinary stories. First of all, it reminds us that Vashti is a princess herself, that she comes from royalty, right? She is not some commoner who comes to the palace and doesn't want to dance naked in front of the king. She doesn't want to dance naked in front of the king because she's royalty. And you don't ask royalty to do that. So the Midrash sets up Vashti as a full character. She's not two-dimensional. That's the first thing. We've got to have the Midrash for that. And the second thing is the Midrash on Esther. She's not such a good girl. What's her relationship with Mordechai, for example? He's her uncle, dod. There's many other meanings to that word, one of which is romantic. There's an extraordinary Midrash from Midrash Rabbah in which Mordechai is sitting Esther on his lap, talking to her as he would talk to a wife. Okay, not such a good girl. And also we could ask all these questions about Esther, which we should ask anyway. How is it that a Jewish girl ends up in a non-Jewish palace, being married to a non-Jewish king, and not saying that she's Jewish until she's finally prodded at the end, told, hey, listen, if you don't stand up for us, help is going to come from somewhere else. No, she wants to be the heroine of the story. She doesn't want help to come from someone else, so the book is not named after her. Okay? She also has some ego in the game. How do we deal with a feminist reading of Megillah Esther's? The Midrash. The Midrash is our saving grace here. And the second one, of course, is to notice that the book is all about the lives of women, how the lives of women are bounded and circumscribed by the men around them, not always so wisely the men around them. We have Achashverosh, what a buffoon. Like the main male character of the book is a total buffoon, okay? Then we have Mordechai, he's also not so although we say he's the great Mordechai, who saved us along with Esther. But we have these two male characters, by the way, juxtaposed in the same way Vashti and Esther are juxtaposed. One could juxtapose Achashverosh and Mordechai. So we've got complicated male characters, many of whom are buffoons. We've got complicated female characters who are not two-dimensional. I mean, to me, it's a feminist soap opera waiting to be written. We don't often see a text with two women, except in the Megillot, because we have Ruth and Naomi, and we have Esther and Vashti. How fabulous that in our Megillot, there's a really clear female voice. Even in Eicha, you have Bat Zion and Yerushalayim, both of which are imagined as women. And so I love the fact that the Megillah really have very well-rounded female characters, leading roles, actually, heroines of the story. And in a way, Vashti is a heroine of the story too. I don't like when people say Vashti's the anti-heroine and Esther's the heroine. If it wasn't for Vashti, we wouldn't get Esther, And Vashti also, like a lot of us like to think of her as proto-feminist, the first woman who says no, and no means no. Why did Vashti say no? Let me read a Midrash with you. I think it's important to understand Vashti through this Midrash. It's from Midrash Rabbah on Esther. I'm just going to read it. I think it's fun for people to just listen. We have Vashti refuses to dance naked before the king, or just with we don't even know if it's naked, we know Bechetar Malchut, right? Just to dance with the crown of the kingdom. But remember what I said in the beginning, Vashti is royalty. She comes from a royal family. So listen to this wonderful Midrash. The queen Vashti refused. She begged with him forcibly, saying, if they consider me beautiful, they'll want to enjoy me themselves and kill you. And if they consider me plain, I'll bring disgrace on you. Look at her way of arguing with Achashverosh is so logical. It almost reminds me of Abraham and Sarah, when Abraham takes Sarah down and says, she's my sister, right? We want to hear what Sarah says. I think Sarah would say exactly what Vashti is saying here. Listen, if they think I'm beautiful, it's a shame for you. And if they think I'm ugly, it's also a shame for you. Okay, let me just continue. He was blind to her hints, and he didn't take her goading. She then sent word to him, you used to be the stable boy of my father's house, and you were used to bringing in before yourself naked harlots. And now that you've ascended the throne, you have not abandoned your evil ways. Oh my gosh, listen to Vashti, where we've learned her in Sunday school to be this sort of harloty woman. She's yelling at Achashverosh saying, you know what, in my father's house, you are nothing. And now you're asking me to be nothing. We're both royalty, and I won't take that, okay? And then at the end, he doesn't listen to her. And the third thing she says to him is, even those condemned by my father's house were not punished naked. You know, if you're going to punish me, she says, just remember that even prisoners are given human dignity, right? So you have to at least afford me this human dignity. So I think these are fantastic female characters. Are they meant to be compared to each other, Vashti to Esther? No, I think we're wrong when we compare them. I think they're both very strong characters, each one in her own right, and they come to give us a different message, okay? If Vashti's message is no means no, and Esther's message is there's a way to get into power at the time it's needed, in the way it's needed, then those are two very different messages. By the way, I think they both come to give us the message of human dignity. Both of them are women who do not want to lose their human dignity. Our tradition has definitely done this comparison, Vashti the bad, Esther the good. It starts from Hebrew school, in which we dress our daughters usually as Esther. And if we dress them as Vashti, it's vampy, you know, it's going to be the bad girl. And if we dress them as Esther, it's the beautiful queen. I think we have to start teaching Vashti in our religious schools as a real character, along with these midrashim that hone in on her refusal to let go of her human dignity. Imagine if we taught that in our Hebrew schools. We wouldn't be then elevating Esther at the expense of diminishing Vashti. You know, that's number one. Number two, we have got to deal with the contest, the beauty contest that gets Esther into the palace in the first place. You know, we very conveniently skip over that. I get it. You know, for grade 1 and 2, it's all very cutesy wootsy. But you know what? The story has a very difficult moment in which a Jewish girl is brought into a harem. She's powdered and oiled up, okay? And then she's brought for a trial run to the king. That is not a nice Jewish girl. So we got to think about, how do we teach that to our kids and answer the questions they will ask us, which is, how is that behavior okay? What was the need, the sha'at dechak, you know, the moment of emergency that Esther was answering, and why did she say yes to those things which might have compromised her human dignity? You know, that we have to teach that in Hebrew school. And the most important thing is that we've got to talk about the end of chapter 1, in which this declaration goes out that all women should obey their husbands. And, you know, I think every year as I hear that read, every year I think of those young kids hearing that, and the male privilege it assumes, and the male privilege it communicates, and the male privilege it manifests. And I think to myself, all those young boys hearing that message are going home and wanting to manifest it. And it's unbelievably problematic. So if we do not deconstruct that message at the end of the chapter and talk about it out loud with our kids, then we're perpetuating it. So I also want to present another midrash, which I think is really important for us to talk about that declaration that goes out, all women shall obey their husbands. Listen to what the midrash does with that. And I want to say that when we read it at our synagogue, we read it sarcastically. Okay, we read it in a sarcastic voice. I've got a long plastic cigar and I'm reading it like this, because I want my congregation to hear that the text is being sarcastic, that the text is saying, oh yeah, because of Vashti now, all women should obey their husbands. Don't forget, ladies, don't forget, girls, where you're supposed to say yes and where you're supposed to say no. And you better learn your lesson from Vashti. That is sarcasm. So listen to this midrash, which I think enunciates this sarcasm. We should be teaching this along with the deconstruction of those last lines. What about this line that says, and therefore all women shall obey their husbands? And the line from the Megillah is, so he sent letters into all the king's provinces that every man should bear rule in his own house and speak according to the language of his people. Umidaber kilshon amo. Like, what on earth does that mean? Listen to this midrash. Again, from Midrash Rabbah, chapter 4, Esther. Rav Huna said, Achashverosh was utterly devoid of sense. If a man wants to eat lentils and his wife wants to eat beans, can he force her? Surely she does as she likes. Rav Pinchas said, nay more, he made himself a laughing stock. Surely she does as she likes. If a Median marries a Persian woman, is she to speak Median? If a Persian marries a Median woman, is she to speak Persian? What a fabulous midrash. It basically says, the end of this chapter is sarcastic. It is not telling us that all women should obey their husbands and speak in the language of their husband. No one is going to agree to that. It is the buffoonery of Achashverosh that would suggest that he can send a decree out to every man in the kingdom saying, you guys are king of the castle, right? He's hardly king of his own castle. So how can he expect that from the rest of his kingdom? It's so important we understand that from within its proto-feminist context, and that we read those lines with the eyes of women. And if you read those lines with the eyes of women, you hear them differently. Historically, Purim is a holiday of parody. We have the Purim rabbi, where you get dressed up as your rabbi. You're allowed to make fun of being Jewish. You're allowed to make fun of yourself. You're allowed to make fun of Jewish tradition. Often in traditional circles, the evening service before the reading of the Megillah makes fun of all the tunes, and we bring in silly tunes, and all that is extraordinary. I want us to remember when we read the Megillah that this is a parody. This is a text of parody for a holiday of parody. It is our own version of Feast of Fools. We are all being foolish as we listen to a somewhat foolish story to remind us of what's really important and serious in the world.